Welcome to Ubercube. I'm your host, May, also known as Magic, and I'm joined here by my other host.
It's Stu. Hi, May. It feels
Hi,
like
Stu.
it's been a while.
It has been a while.
It's been...
And you might be noticing the absence of our dear Anthony.
Yes.
Unfortunately, he has obligations.
He does, so we're still here. We're still talking about Cube, so it's just May and I that you're going to have. So you get the best host and well, I don't know where you want to put me. But anyway... Yeah, Anthony has some obligations, and I feel like I don't even remember what this podcast is about, to be honest. It feels like it's been so long since I've been on, but it's good to be back. I was on vacation for a couple of weeks. The listeners are going to be like, what? I heard you last week or maybe the week before, but it feels like it's been a long time since we recorded. So today we're kind of, as May beautifully put it, going back to our roots, and we're going to look at a cube.
So the story of this is that I have a friend, like, in person and not just across the internet, so to speak. He is somebody who's been excited about Cube and has been the most excited about, like, playing the fake Cube and whatnot. And
Sure.
He ended up going out of his way to make his own Cube, right?
Okay.
And he wanted me to look at his list and try to help him look through cuts and give suggestions and whatnot. And I figured this would actually make a really good episode to talk about.
Nice.
Where we can kind of go back to our roots.
Yes. I feel like this kind of our bread and butter, right? This is where we used to get a lot of guests on, and we would talk about different cards and different strategies and more of the essence of Cube rather than, some of the... And look, I love talking about anything Cube related is good as far as I'm concerned, but I like that we're doing something like this. All right. As always, as part of our little spiel here, tell me what you're drinking today, May.
So I have been saving this drink for a bit. I have a Dragonberry Wizard Sour Ale.
Ooh.
And it's from the Confluence Brewing Company. It's just... So for context, I had a get-together a couple weeks ago, and my sister ended up picking it up because I said, pick me up a sour. I don't particularly care what flavor. Okay. And then she's just like, it has dragons, it has berries. This seems like something up your alley.
That's a winner.
I was like, I got to save one of these for the recording.
Yeah, that is a winner. Dragons and berries. That's a winner as far as I'm concerned. I love it. All right, cool. I am having today, I bought these just purely because of the name, I will say. So it's called 1,000 Haze to Die. Love that. It is a tropical hazy IPA, and the brewery is Havoc Brewing Company out of Pittsburgh here in North Carolina. So I'm going to crack this one because it's been a few days. All right. It's not your typical, what's the set? There's always the set that everybody talks about, right? With this kind of vibe of a cube. Innistrad, right? But it is. It's not a spooky cube, but it is...
It's spoopy.
Spoopy.
All I can say is that this is a funny looking October.
Yeah,
so kind of off topic.
Out of season,
not that I want to derail us too much, but have you noticed that there's been a lot of Halloween stuff that's been putting out earlier?
I've seen Christmas. Okay, it's part of.
Well, the Christmas has been doing that for the last decade.
You got to get ahead of things.
Slowly encroaching into the other months.
Yeah,
this is the first time you're seeing people actually putting out Halloween stuff early.
Oh, so you're not talking about just in the stores. You're talking about you're seeing Halloween decorations.
Oh no, in the stores.
Oh, I was going to say. Okay, so I'm not seeing much. Yeah, in the houses. There was one house around the corner that would literally start decorating immediately after Labor Day for Halloween. They'd have 50-foot skeletons and all the ghosts and all that kind of stuff, which I kind of, I dig it. But yeah, but
I'm in the boat that it is always the season for spooky season.
It's always the season.
But this is kind of a spooky inspired list where it's kind of a blend of Innistrad, but we also have lots of stuff from Ravnica, surprisingly. We have a few things from Ixalan. Unsurprisingly, we have a few things from Duskmourn.
Yeah, Duskmourn, Vow. I saw some as well. Yeah, I agree. Nice little collection as far as the sets that this has come from.
Yeah, it's like a nice little menagerie of thematic things. And, in terms of flavor, you can't really go wrong with just generic spooky things.
No,
right?
So the first thing I always look at is the overview. This hasn't been built yet, so there isn't a synopsis or discussion about each of the colors or the archetypes or any of that kind of stuff. So I'm going to sort of put out there, and you tell me if this kind of aligns color-wise with what you saw the cube to represent. So white is and again, this is just my impression, humans, spirits, tokens, and equipment. Blue was spirits, graveyard, mill, reanimate, a little bit of reanimate. Black, sacrifice, aristocrats, some vampires and some zombies. Red, aggressive, some discard, again, some more vampires, wolves, and burn. And then green, we've got wolves, ramp, some counter stuff, and some graveyard stuff. One thing that I want to specify is there is a lot of, I know Anthony likes to call it cross-pollination across all the colors. This is not a things just belong in a single, a double, or even triple color, right? There's a lot of sort of cross archetypes across all of these colors. So I don't know. You tell me if that's something that you kind of followed when you were looking at the cube, but I do feel like there's a lot of synergy across all the colors.
Yeah, I definitely feel like that is one of the big pluses that I give to when I'm looking at this environment.
Okay, so you're calling it a positive. First of all, how much experience do you have? Like, how many times have you played this cube?
None. This is literally a fresh cube.
Okay.
Right? This is us, like, fresh going in blind.
Fresh out the box.
We're looking at, like, a fresh cube and giving our just raw opinions on this and trying to work our way through to help give some direction for some cuts.
Okay. So, and to sort of expand on that point just a little bit, sometimes I feel like that can be a good thing. And again, within the context of this cube, I don't know. This is very fresh. Obviously, haven't had a chance to play it yet. But I always feel like there's at least a couple of ways, or at least a couple of main ways that you can break that down, right? So number one, you've got all this cross-pollination again across archetypes, across colors. So you've got the ability to be able to pick up cards that will suit the playstyle, the archetype across the board. That can be a good thing because it means that you've got a lot of choices, a lot of support. Maybe if you don't get the mana that you're looking for, then you can kind of, stay in a 2 or maybe 3 color lane, and that's good. The second thing, which might not be quite, or might maybe a little detrimental, is that it can have the effect of, within the framework of the cube, promoting a little bit more of the good stuff kind of soupy. Don't want to say spoopy, but maybe the spoopy good stuff, right? Because everything, maybe in a small way, or you've got a large majority of the cards that synergize with each other, and essentially you may just be incentivized to take the best cards. I know that that's something that you actively look to reduce in the cube, sort of your magnum opus, the fake cube. You've always said that you want to keep players within a lane, allow for some amount of creativity, but the archetypes are there for a very good reason, right? You want to sort of keep players within, again, kind of that lane. Whereas with this, and this may actually be the case, that you've got this very broad and varied ability to make the archetypes work in a multitude of colors, and again, maybe this isn't something that sticks out, and maybe this is a question that I can ask just now. Do you feel like sticking out that there may be a tendency, and maybe the strong way to draft is that just taking the best cards is always going to lead to the best deck?
So I feel like yes, but I also feel like that's kind of the advantage for what this environment's trying to go for.
Yeah.
Right? Because when I'm looking at a lot of the lists here, like on my first impression, I am looking at, this is a pile of like good stuff cards. This is a pile of stuff that either works really well individually or works really well as, let's say, part of a meta package rather than an archetypal package.
Sure.
Like, for example, let's take Dauntless Bodyguard or Usher of the Fallen,
right,
etc., where it's like, these are aggressive creatures. There's not really like an archetypal overlap between those two cards. They're just aggressive creatures.
They are.
And sometimes I think that can be a good thing, especially when it's under the context that, like, my cube, for example, is very synergistic. And when we're looking at a cube that is trying to be no, I don't want to say counterpart as much as a different experience to that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I will follow on with that. I agree 100%. There do seem to be some outliers. I'd maybe tend to favor blue a little bit, but I look at something like Snapcaster Mage, and you're going to have to go a long way to convince me that if I'm even remotely in that color, that Snapcaster Mage is going to be a pretty high pick for me. And there do seem to be a few of those outlier high power cards that doesn't necessarily mean they're out of place or that they don't belong or that they're going to skew the draft or the play, but definitely those are the kind of things that sticks out to me. One of the things that immediately stuck out to me, and maybe I'm a little biased because of my time with Anthony's Horror Cube, is Spirits. Spirits has a lot of very, very strong support in Blue-White, in Azorius. I know for a fact that that is an archetype that either, unless you very, very consciously keep it in check power-wise or allow other archetypes to really stand up to it, it is something that can get out of hand very quickly. I don't know if this is something that specifically has been discussed previously. Obviously, you haven't played it, I haven't played it, so maybe playtesting would highlight something like that. It was definitely something with Anthony's Cube that he immediately said, oh my God, Spirits is completely broken. If you get all the right pieces, you're winning games far too easily. I definitely
and
see
Spirits
that.
have like historically in their limited environments,
They're crazy,
been very prominent.
They are, yeah. They've been good in multiple formats. I mean, Modern, definitely. I mean, considering how powerful Modern has been historically, there was a time that Spirits, as well as some of the other sort of typal decks like Humans, has been incredibly powerful. So those are the kind of things that I always kind of keep my eye on.
So to add some context, now that we've kind of gone through our initial impressions of the cube and kind of what our interpretations are and how we're like assessing it, we can start with kind of the vision here.
Right.
What he said is that he's looking for it to play kind of on the slower side and maybe one or two viable aggro decks, but they kind of slip underneath the cracks.
Sure.
He's looking for it to encourage very spider spawning-esque style decks where we have things like spider spawning. We have the things like Forbidden Alchemy and, Mystical Teachings.
Mystical Teachings, yes, okay.
Love those as a pair.
Yes.
I tend to like those just as an engine, and when you're doing lots of graveyard shenanigans anyways, and you're building, lots of areas into that. One of the three notable cards that I was given was Spider Spawning as the notable cards for this cube to represent, like, what this cube is trying to do. And I feel like that it is a good kind of benchmark for us to work off of we are trying to make sure that we are keeping as much stuff that either gets stuff into our graveyard, works from the graveyard, or encourages like some kind of interaction with it, and that interacts with things like spider spawning, things like the previously mentioned things.
Sure,
right?
Yeah. I like spider spawning as a card, and I have drafted a good amount of decks with, so we have our good friend Samich, Chris, his Sultai Cube, and that's one that is definitely kind of a fan favorite. It's definitely something that can tend to get run over by aggro if aggro can go a bit unchecked. But I will say that is one thing that there are some 2/1s for one, okay? So you do have some aggressive creatures in here, but I definitely like the fact that the style of the aggro packages definitely doesn't look to be, let's just chuck all of the undercosted / hasty / whatever value 1 and 2 drops and hope that, that's enough of an aggro package to keep some of the other archetypes that aggro will typically keep in check. There does seem to have been a good amount of thought that's been put into those early, like, Boros-y kind of drops. And not just because they are looking to slow things down, but also because they're looking to have some kind of quasi-support for the other archetypes. In particular, like, Usher of the Fallen is a good example, but Usher of the Fallen is an aggressive card. It's a 2/1 for 1, but it also has that boast ability where you can create tokens. So even though that in itself could be considered an aggressive card, you can see the argument for putting it in there because of that secondary ability.
Moving kind of on from that, we have 2 additional cards that are also benchmarks for their respective categories. The first is Huntmaster of the Fells, which is the 2 red-green for a 2/2. Whenever this creature enters or transforms, put a 2/2 green wolf creature token onto the battlefield and you gain 2 life. At the beginning of each upkeep, if no spells were cast last turn, transform it. And it'll turn into a werewolf and then you get more wolves. Yeah. And it's supposed to be kind of like that, I guess, mid-rangey type card, or maybe an aggro top-end card, but I think that it is a pretty good semblance of this is a card that can put pressure on, it can extend your board, and trying to support that as a power benchmark is very fair. which is interesting when you put it right next to something, which is the next one, Jolly Balloon Man, which is 1 in a red white for a 1/4 with haste. Pay 1, tap, create a token that's a copy of another target creature, except it's 1/1 red balloon creature token into its additional, and then sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step.
Yeah.
Activate only as a sorcery. So, in fact, I'll let you cover your initial thoughts on having those two side by side.
Okay, so I like Huntmaster of the Fells. I believe it's Reed Duke's favorite Magic card. At least it was a few years ago. And I think, like you say, it works just fine as a mid-range. I don't know if I would necessarily call it top end. I would also call it, or almost call it, sort of where you want to get to in the mid game to be able to apply enough pressure to then get to the late game, or whatever you're trying. So obviously it's green red. What are you trying to do after you play this 4 mana pretty constant pressure needs an answer creature as soon as possible, right? Are you looking to throw burn spells? Are you looking to save up for even more expensive green creatures or whatever? So I like it. I think it has a good home in one of these sort of slower, if the cube in general supports a strong mid-range package because the aggro isn't too overpowered and the control decks don't just have a quick way to generate a lot of advantage. I didn't see any planeswalkers, and I'm pretty confident that there isn't any. Yeah, so there's no planeswalkers. So it's to me that's a nice thing, right? So I think that Huntmaster of the Fells, fine for a mid-range, can generate advantage, but it's wolves, and I'm always a little, as much as I would love wolves to be great, there is this condition of the not casting spells. You can always just say, hey, I'm going to pass my turn after playing Huntmaster. Is that going to be detrimental? Because I feel like there's a lot of action with the rest of the cube. I don't want to say it's sort of a low to the ground cube, but there's plenty of things to do in the early turns that, you're not just able to put that down and sort of rest on your laurels, so to speak. So I think that's fine. But Jolly Balloon Man, for me, Jolly Balloon Man is on a power level separate to Huntmaster of the Fells. It's 1 mana less. It's a 1/4. It has haste. Yes, you've got this activated ability that you also have to pay 1 mana for, but you can just start generating so much value so quickly with something like that, not to say that that's a sort of centerpiece of the whole cube, but that's something that I'm looking at as I'm going to evaluate a lot of not just the 3, but also the potentially 4 drops because it's got that 1 CMC or 1 mana for the activation. Where does that fit? And I'll be honest, I don't know. I don't know where I would put that. Boros has got a few other really, really powerful effects. It's got Arabella, so now you're being rewarded for your load of the ground creatures. So you're able to, dump your hand very quickly. Now you're able to put out Jolly Balloon Man with Arabella. You start, putting creatures out there to put tokens out there and swinging and generating a lot of advantage. Again, where that fits in the whole scope of the cube, I don't know, but if that's the vision of the curator, that's where, this is where they want Boros and Gruul sort of going up against each other, then I'll be honest, I like it. I think that's cool, and I think that promotes cool gameplay.
I agree. I think that you've kind of captured a lot of my initial impressions with it, where it feels like when I'm looking at these two cards, I am looking at kind of the, let's say, floor of each and then the ceiling of each. And the floor of each are both really good cards. They're both able to just generate a lot of value. They're both able to put on a lot of pressure. Even if they are, to a degree, doing so in a different way and at different power levels, they work kind of well as that kind of scale. Where we have on one end where it rewards you for being in that kind of slower, dirtier game, while the other one's like, hey, this one's going to really put the pressure on really quickly. And when we take that into account and treat it as a kind of, let's say, power scale of fitting the rest of the cube within those, it gives us a lot better of an idea of what kind of things exist as outliers, of things that are, stronger than Balloon Man style decks and things that are weaker than the Huntmaster of the Fells, or decks that would feature Huntmaster of the Fells, right?
Yeah, and I look at something like Edgar, right? So Edgar Charmed Groom is in here, which is a favorite of mine. It was one that I really enjoyed the look of, and I actually bought it for a commander deck because it's a powerful card. It's not a It's not a centerpiece for a commander deck, but it can definitely be a centerpiece for a cube. So Edgar Charmed Groom, 2 colorless white-black, legendary creature, vampire noble, gives all your other vampires +1/+1, and when it dies, you can return it to the battlefield transformed under its opponent's control, comes back as a legendary artifact. At the beginning of your upkeep, create a 1/1 white and black vampire creature token with lifelink and put a bloodline counter on Edgar Markov's coffin. That's what it transforms into. Then, if there are 3 or more bloodline counters, remove those counters, transform it becomes Edgar Charmed Groom. One of the things that stuck out to me with this, and I picked it up because of this, even though I kind of look about, the rest of the cube. There's no Swords to Plowshares. There's no Path to Exile. So immediately I'm looking at exile effects, not just because of this card, but because of the graveyard synergy that we can talk about as well. That to me, this is a card that is likely to stick because of that effect. You're going to have this constant flippy-floppy if the games go long, right? And you're getting this great bonus from Edgar. So I don't know, would I put that in a similar kind of category as your Huntmasters and your Jolly Balloon Mans and other, within that 4-drop or 4 to take effect kind of cards? I probably would, and that's another reason why I think, at least within these gold cards, within that similar mana cost, as far as what you're looking at, and again, mid-range, I think this is at the high end of the mid-range where you're looking to apply pressure, and you can kind of build a deck. What do you want to do? Do you want to put all of your power or all of your deck and the focus of your deck into that early to the mid game, or do you want to put some amount where you're trying to get to that mid game, which may reduce the impact of the low to mid game, but then maybe when it escalates to the end game, maybe you've got a little bit more action going on there. So I think that gives you a good option. And I would argue that for both Jolly Balloon Man and for Huntmaster of the Fells, those are 3 nice cards that give you those options to sort of control the speed at which you want your own deck to operate.
Moving on, we are now having to address kind of our overarching goal here. And that is addressing, let's say, cuts, outliers, and trying to figure out how to trim this down. Because one of the hardest parts about starting with a new cube, and this is generally the advice that I give when people are starting to build their first cube, is that if you like a certain card or a certain package of cards, just throw them in initially and just to get to the number, right? And then worry about cutting things back after you have already hit that, right?
So, we'll expand on that before you go any further.
Yeah,
Let's start. Tell us the number first of all, because this is an interesting one.
So this cube is currently at 611 cards.
That's
now,
awesome.
Obviously, we're not going to sit here all day and try to cut almost 250 or so cards, right? In order to bring this into a 360 range, right? It would just be too much.
Yeah,
right?
I want paid for that. I want to get paid if I'm doing that. I'm sorry.
But we can at least give a place to start, right? We can give an overarching strategy that players that are listening and curators that are listening can use to appropriately address kind of their issues.
Yes.
Like one of the first things that we did when we were assessing the cube, for example, is I tend to first start looking at a cube, and the first thing that I will do is that I will go over to the tab and I will switch it to curve view. The first thing that I'm doing is to look at each color and see how they curve, because I am interested to see how many cards am I going to see at that 1-drop slot and that 2-drop slot, because that tells me how aggressive those packages are going to end up being.
Yep.
Right? How much of that density are we going to see? How much is that actually going to matter? The next part of that is recognizing kind of where the biggest density is currently, and that's usually going to tell you where a majority of, let's say, are, I won't say slot competition as much as relevant plays are happening.
Sure.
Because when you're picking a pack and you have 4 different 3-drops to pick one, you're just going to try to pick the best 3-drop.
The best 3.
And it's usually going to be like within your colors or your interests or whatever just happens to be the best one there, right? And that can be a really good approach for it. But when we are trying to take an initial top-down approach looking at the curve and trying to figure out and trim out, we can figure out how many of these things actually need to be here. So, for example, when I look at white being at 72 cards at the moment, 35 of those cards are currently non-creatures compared to 37 of those being creatures. And for context, let me grab the fake cube real quick.
You don't see that as often. That is not something I see very often, is that the creature count is, I don't want to say so low, but you've got almost half. Typically,
it's almost half.
Yeah, I'm looking
for
at green as being like 75%.
My fake cube runs about 49 to 50 for each color, right?
Okay.
And my white section is 35 creatures to 14 non-creatures, and that's not even counting the adventure cards. Like, when we are looking at the gameplay that we are trying to, let's say, encourage, we are looking at what people are trying to do early in the game, and when we are looking at what people are trying to do early in the game, you are having to look at, let's say, those 2-drops. When people are trying to draft white, they're going to be trying to look for those creatures to get on the board, as opposed to, say, Angelic Gift. Because unless I'm missing something, I didn't really see anything that, like, hugely benefits from, having this big enchantment package outside of, like, the Reverent Hoplite for the devotion.
I was going to say, that stuck out to me. There are a lot of enchantments. There's a lot of enchantments in white. Actually, white is the most represented at 14 enchantments, followed by green at 12, blue at 10, black at 8, and then red at 6. Enchantments, I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with them. I like them because they can be fun, they can provide powerful effects. They're also a type that can be incredibly devastating to the game play. And unless you are sort of in the focus of enchantments within the cube and providing a lot of support for interacting with them, they can be very, very difficult pieces to get rid of. Now, enchantments can't block, typically, unless it's an enchantment creature, but they can't block, they can't attack. So obviously they're a little limited if you've got an aggressive cube as well. Obviously, again, we talked about the fact that this doesn't have this really, really strong and quick aggressive option, but that is a lot of enchantments for me, a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot, especially when I don't see a particular, and this just could be me overlooking it because there's 600 something odd cards, right? There's a lot of cards here. And while I see like some of the fear cards in here, I'm not sure if I'm seeing any of the other enchantment cards. Let me just advance. We're going to go into the Oracle text. We're going to grab all the things that care about enchantment. And once we filter out all the things that care about enchantment, 22 of the 611 cards actually have some mentioning of enchantment.
Yeah.
And that's not even counting like the things that just remove enchantments, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, and I will say, and this is, again, we're doing this kind of a breakdown. So hopefully the owner of this cube will listen, will take some feedback, take it as though we're just looking to break things down. We're doing this non-politically, right? This is never. There's no attack. It's meant to be feedback. Yeah,
but I will pick up. This is not a. I'm here to roast my friend.
It's not a roast.
That is not our intent.
Exactly. But I will look at. Okay, so. And whether or not this is a trap that other curators fall into, I don't know, because there's sometimes that words on cards look so wonderful, but then when you really think about it, you're like, yeah. So I'll break one down. This is Bequeathal. This is a 1 green for an enchant creature. If enchanted creature is put into a graveyard, draw 2 cards. You draw 2 cards. That's fine. But it's 1 mana, so you're paying tempo and you're paying another card to hopefully get 1 card net out of this. To me, I want to do more in the early turns than just put an enchantment on a creature that doesn't give it any effect, that is going to net me 1 card. Okay, I'd rather something that was a little bit more interesting. Drawing cards is not uninteresting by itself. I love drawing cards. Some of the most powerful cards ever printed have only drawn cards. But these are the kind of things that, like, I feel like you can do better with a slot. There's nothing horror about it. It doesn't really seem to be on theme. If you're trying to give ways for green to be able to draw cards, I feel like you can do it in a better way than just putting an enchantment on that doesn't do anything for the creature other than impact you when it dies.
Right. So I think that, like, especially when we look at the green package, right, where we see once again where we're at like 41 creatures, 34 non-creatures.
Right.
It almost feels like there's like this almost intentional trying to balance the amount of creatures versus non-creatures here, when trying to balance those at a top-down level is not really going to be that notable to gameplay outside of just, I would have rather really seen a creature here rather than the thing that enchants a creature.
Yes.
And that tends to happen. And I like to call it the ooh shiny syndrome. And I fall for this all the time, where it's like, here's like a package of cards that I really want to play with, where it's like, in this case, enchantments, right? Where it's just like, here's just like this bunch of enchantments, let's say a bunch of the rune packages, bunch of things that happen to draw cards, and these are all kind of neat things to play with, but there's not really that thing that ties them together and makes me want to go into that, right?
Yes.
And even if there was one or two cards that does that, I still have to draft into that card for me to care about it at that point. And one of the things that he mentioned that he was concerned of was build-arounds that look like they're more trouble than they're worth. And this is kind of the inverse of that, where instead of having a build-around where you have like one card that you're trying to dedicate an entire package towards, instead you have an entire package without, cards to do anything with.
Yes.
And I think that that's like a good place to start with, like, gutting things out, because having cards that are proactive to your game and cards that actually let you interact with the game. And let's take something like Wolf Willow Haven, for example. This is an enchantment that I actually kind of like in here. It's something that you can play early in the game where it's 1 and a green, enchantment aura, enchant land. Whenever it's tapped for mana, you add an additional green. Then later you can pay 4 and a green, sacrifice it, and create a 2/2 wolf. So the reason that this is really good compared to a lot of the other enchantments is that it becomes a creature once you already have a bunch of mana, but it's a bunch of mana when you're trying to get to your creatures.
Yes.
It's proactive.
Yes.
But it also gives you things to do early in the game that aren't just turning creatures sideways.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the approach that I would give advice for.
Yeah. Even for, so it's funny you mentioned that. I was also looking at the one above it. So it's Rune of Might, 1 and a green for an aura rune, enchant permanent. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card. As long as enchanted permanent is a creature, it gets +1/+1 and has trample. As long as enchanted permanent is an equipment, it has equipped creature, gets +1/+1 and has trample. This is a new card to me, but I love the fact that you've got the ability to just put this on an equipment, because obviously when a creature dies, you keep the equipment, you can move the equipment around, and it does replace itself. So this to me is much more fun and impactful and constant, and I enjoy cards like this where you've got some options. And I don't want to call it lazy, because just saying, hey, I want to put stuff out there that makes my creatures bigger, that's a very sort of timmy-tammy thing to do, right? Lots of players out there that enjoy, like, hey, I want to put creatures out, I want to make them big, I want to turn them sideways. So things like this are fun because they're optional as far as you can put, again, creature or equipment is good. And you've got, and it replaces itself. It's a little not on theme to me. I like the flavor. I don't, or I like the effect. Not quite sure of why it's in like a spooky. If it's not Innistrad, that's fine. If that's not the goal, but I like the card.
I mean, I think runes can be kind of ominous. I think that you can work with that. I think that when we are like looking at like a side thing in order to refine it, I think that there's an entire like rune package in here. And if you're wanting to keep that rune package,
that's even better.
I would say go more into the equipment stuff. Because, like, you have an okay amount of equipment at the moment, but not, like, a ton in order to make those runes feel like that's getting that flexibility in it. So that we can feel like you're getting you're getting the juice for your squeeze even when you're not getting the payoffs.
I was actually going to talk about that. I would actually argue that there is a lot of equipment in here. Some of them definitely, like, flavor-wise, are just incredible. So I'll name this one because I love it, and I'm actually totally stealing it for my Diablo cube. So this is Haunted Plate Mail, 4 colorless for the equipment. Equipped creature gets +4/+4. You can pay 0 until end of turn. The equipment itself becomes a 4/4 spirit artifact creature that's no longer an equipment. Activate this ability only if you control no creatures, and you can equip it for 4. For me, flavor-wise, that is absolutely wonderful. And the fact that it becomes a spirit with all of the other spirit stuff is awesome. I love it from a flavor perspective. I don't know how effective it's going to be in the scope of the cube. I don't even know if I would want to play this in a spirits deck where probably at 4 mana I'm looking to play something like Phantom. I'm looking to play something like Dungeon Geist or Gutter Skulker. Right. So there's other really, really strong options. But I feel like flavor-wise, that's really cool. But there is a lot of equipment, a lot of colorless equipment, and I would even argue, going on with the discussion about making cuts and bringing the numbers down, there are a lot of colorless cards in general, 39 cards. And if you're starting to think about, okay, we want to start cutting out some of the enchantments and maybe bring out the non-creature number or bring down the non-creature numbers, do you want to look at having maybe the same impact or having the same process with those colorless cards? Some of them stick out power level wise. We've got Agatha's Soul Cauldron in here.
Yeah, Agatha's Soul Cauldron's huge, especially considering that it is a graveyard hate piece in a cube that you are trying to encourage graveyard stuff in. And I feel like that this is an important note because this is something that we've talked about in a few other episodes, and it's something that we should reiterate because especially when you're first starting out with a cube, it's an easy mistake to make. And that is creating counterplay options does not mean creating the thing that counters the whole cube. And to add a little bit more texture to what I mean here is it means that you don't want to punish your players for playing the way that you're trying to lead them to.
No,
right?
Agreed.
Don't punish them for doing the thing that you're encouraging them to do.
And let's say this, there are some real punishers for the graveyard effects. And that is definitely, so at least green and blue and black as well, definitely has effects that care about the graveyard. And even just looking at some of the artifacts that are hating that, you've got things like Grafdigger's Cage, you've got Soul Guide Lantern, you've got Agatha's Soul Cauldron. So there's definitely a non-zero. And those are easy to splash, right? Do I want to say they're just put in there for the sideboard? I'll be honest, I don't like having cards in a cube that are just likely going to be relegated to the sideboard to hose other strats. But
yeah, I think the thing that makes Soul Cauldron like leagues above all the rest of these, outside of just the obvious power discrepancy here, is that Agatha's Soul Cauldron is a card that is good enough to main board. Like, this is a card that increases your like pressure, it increases your board state, even if your opponent is not doing graveyard stuff. Even if you're not doing combo stuff, even if you're not trying to do stupid things with the Soul Cauldron, at its floor, you are putting +1/+1 counters on things and denying your opponent graveyard interaction just for it existing.
Yeah, I agree.
And that can be problematic.
Yeah, agreed. I think within the scope of the cube itself, because there are strategies that become very evident when you look through the list, that Agatha's Soul Cauldron has been put in there as a supportive piece, right? This has not been put in the cube as a hate piece. It's put in there as a support piece. You could maybe argue that Soul Guide Lantern in a vacuum is it a more powerful card? I don't know if it necessarily is. It's definitely up there because it's only 1 mana. When it enters, you exile a card from a graveyard, and all you have to do is tap it to exile each opponent's graveyard. So very, very powerful effect. But as an ongoing supportive / hate piece, Agatha's Soul Cauldron is pretty bonkers.
So the second thing that I do when I'm trying to look at what I'm trying to cut or looking for outliers is that I will actually go over to the filter tab, where if you click list, you go over to filter and you change it from color and you change it to rarity, it'll actually give you the list of your cards and it'll tell you how many in each rarity that you have. Okay. And if you'll notice, there are 127 cards, 127 commons, 234 uncommons, 228 rares, and 22 mythics. Now, keep in mind, rarity is not always like a perfect 1-for-1 for power. However, you will notice that generally speaking, in limited environments, cards that are more generally powerful tend to be less accessible and come up less.
Agreed.
Right? And when you have those so readily available compared to, say, the rest of your common and uncommons list. So let's say, take a look at, like, you have 234 uncommons compared to your 228 rares. So the first thing that I'm going to look at is looking at like what rares exist in here, and obviously we pointed out the Agatha's Soul Cauldron in here. But there's a secondary part of that where a lot of these rare slots now also exist to sell commander products, right? They also exist to slide into people's decks
Yep.
into other formats. And one of my main examples here, and maybe this is a hot take, is Divine Visitation. I feel like that this is one of those kind of live the dream commander cards that is existing in here, where it is like that kind of vision card. But as soon as you're getting off something like a spider spawning or your lingering spirits or whatever, and you already have a divine visitation, you were already winning that game.
Yes.
Or you were already getting your face kicked in because you wasted a turn on a divine visitation.
Yeah. This is, I suppose, this kind of follows on with the conversation, and it's not just about cuts, but it's also about where do you consider this, right? For me, it's 5 mana, it's at the top end. Is the juice worth the squeeze that anytime a token comes into play, instead you start getting 4/4 white angel creature tokens? For me, it is. I am very happy to try and build a deck around a card like this, because essentially, if you get this down and you have the ability to continue to make tokens, you should be winning the game at that point. The key word here is should. And actually, this is... I'll kind of bring another card into this as a comparison, right? So I don't know if I'm going to label this like cart before the horse, right? Which is where in the scope of the cube and the deck construction does a card like this exist? And are you expecting the players to put the cart before the horse, or even is it necessary from the speed of the cube for the cart to become, to come before the horse? And I'm looking for
I will also note that Lingering Souls is not in this cube.
No Lingering Souls, no. So
no Lingering Souls.
No. Okay, so I'll give you another example, right? So, Harvester of Souls. This is 4 colorless and 2 black. You get a creature demon, Death Touch, 5/5. Whenever another non-token creature dies, you may draw a card, right? So, it's non-token creature. That's cool. You may draw a card. I'm probably going to want to draw a card. But it's 6 mana for a 5/5, which is okay, but not spectacular, at least not by today's standards. Unless you don't really care about the fact that you're having people draw cards, if that's just like a totally secondary and ancillary effect for this card. But to me, I look at this and think, okay, there's 2 sides that I'm going to look at that. Am I just going to look at it as a top end and I really don't care about that secondary effect? Or am I looking at this as a build around? Because otherwise, I've got to have creatures die, which, who knows? Have I needed to survive at that point? Has the game been very swingy? Has, creatures already died? And now all of a sudden I'm thinking, okay, I don't have any reliable way for non-token creatures to die, even though that effect is wonderful and I want to draw cards. But is this kind of all my non-token creatures may be dead already? If I get 1 card out of this, is that enough? I don't know if it is. If I get 2 cards, is that enough? Maybe. But to me, this kind of sticks out as one of those. I would rather have like a 6 mana 6/6 flying that just does anything else, maybe even removes a creature. That way I've got a bit more of a guarantee of value than just hoping for this other effect. I don't know. Tell me what you think.
And keep in mind, like, this is, again, not us roasting. It's so easy for us to kind of get into commander vision and be like, this is a card that like performs well at like commander tables. It does like a lot of value. It's a cool card. And then we remember this is 60 card and 6 mana is a lot of mana, right? Somebody's already dropped the Huntmaster and you just got to turn 6 and played this thing and haven't even drawn a card off of it yet, right?
Yeah, you've already been getting your butt kicked in by wolves. At least I hope that's the case, because I always love to think that there's someone out there who's put together a wolves deck in a cube draft and is just absolutely kicking butt and going 3-0, 6-0. But yeah, to me, like, it's a 5/5, it's Death Touch. Okay, it's fine. It doesn't really attack very well. I'll say it doesn't attack well. It doesn't have evasion. If it had flying, I would actually really like this card a lot more. If it had flying more than Death Touch, I think I would like this card a lot more. But to me, it's an underwhelming card for a 6 mana creature, especially when there's only 2 creatures in black that have a higher top end. One is Reaper of the Abyss, and one is Lotleth Giant. Lotleth Giant should come down sooner because it's getting cost reduction for each creature card in your graveyard. And Reaper of the Abyss is, again, a 6/6 flyer. And you've got the morbid ability where if a creature died this turn, you can destroy a creature. So you've got, a big creature.
That one's good.
And it's 1 mana more.
I was actually going to take a similar approach with a suggestion in the uncommon slot, Dreadhound, where it's 4 black for a 6/6. When it enters mill 3 card, which leads into a lot of that kind of milling graveyard whatnot.
Yeah.
But whenever a creature dies or a creature card is put into a graveyard from the library, each opponent loses 1 life. That feels like something that I want to see in that slot.
Oh, that's spicy. Right? That's spicy. Yeah, I mean, even something like Desecration Demon. Yeah, that's spicy. Now you've got some synergies across the rest of the cube. So yeah, very cool. I'll pick one more. Top end, again, we can wrap that with, is the juice worth the squeeze? Is the cart coming before the horse? If the effect of a top end is unreliable, or if it's something that the players cannot expect to execute reliably, and it's a large part of why that creature should have value, it's probably a trap, and it's probably just going to be played as a vanilla or whatever text the card is. You know, just look for something that has that's a little bit more interesting, or just has a little bit more obvious value. I think the players are going to enjoy it. On the flip side, I'm looking at Wary Watchdog. This is 1 and a green for a creature dog. It's a 3/1. When it enters or dies, surveil 1. It's okay, I guess. It's a 3/1. You're probably just attacking with it and thinking, okay, cool, I'm getting a surveil out of it. But it's not interesting to me. Surveil is fine because I know that there's the graveyard, but to me, this is a little bit filler, even though you do get the 2 surveil triggers. And I know that there's, to me, this is kind of the obvious reason why a card could go in there. But I'm looking at, if I want to fill the graveyard, because that's what this card does, obviously, with the surveil, I'd rather you give me better options to just fill the graveyard. Just let me fill it.
Agree. I feel like that when you're trying to look at your options, we kind of covered it when we were talking about like kind of glue cards as a whole.
Yeah.
And trying to talk about like whether or not it's better to be like a jack of all trades, master of none, but oftentimes better than a master of one. And generally speaking, when we're talking about cubes, it's good to have a lot of that overlap, good to have cards that end up in a lot of categories. But as we mentioned in previous episodes, it can end up happening where if a card does a lot of things mediocrely, you're just going to have a mediocre card.
Yes.
Right? And sure, just being a 3/1 with upside is not nothing. That's nothing to sneeze at.
No, it's not. No, not even a little bit.
I think that it is a good kind of benchmark place where you would kind of look at the rest of the cards that are kind of within that category of you are throwing this in order to kind of fill out those slots, but they aren't particularly mechanically interesting.
No,
right?
Agreed. And I'll give you one more example, not to, roast the cube again. Boundary Lands Ranger. This is 1 and a red for a human ranger. I know there's human support, but bear with me. This is 2 mana for a 2/2. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. Again, if you want me to be able to loot, I'd rather you give me a Faithless Looting. If you want something that is going to draw me cards, then maybe, I don't know, you're in red. It seems, looting is obviously fits that a little bit more. But if you're just giving me something where you don't want the creatures in the 1 and 2 mana to be super duper aggressive because you don't want aggro to be hyper supported in the very, very early game, then either take it out or just, again, give me something that's a little bit more of an interesting thing to do on my second turn. Tell me what you think.
I agree. So kind of roping back to is the juice worth the squeeze conversation that we had a bit ago. We kind of had the opposite approach where we're just kind of like, you have a lot of like this kind of package, but not a lot of, ways to get the juice out of it.
Sure.
Here we have an opposite situation where we have kind of something like at Academy Manufacturer. Really strong card, undeniably strong card,
yes.
But it feels incredibly out of place in here.
Yes.
And
a lot of support.
It comes from a lot of that place of you're wanting to encourage kind of people to do a cool, interesting thing with things, and there's not really a lead to get there.
Yeah, and again, I feel like Commander can be the worst enemy for cube curators if that's a vast portion of your experience of the game and you're taking your knowledge of how the Commander experience is, and even if you're not trying to recreate it, but you're just using your ability to evaluate cards based on Commander as a format, things don't translate well. Again, when you're going from 100 card singleton and 4 players to 40 card to 40 card singleton when you're playing 1v1, the dynamics of the gameplay become very, very, very different. So that's not something that you can. It's definitely an apples to oranges conversation, but it's not also. Or I would say it's not just exclusively Commander, right? You can look at cards that have maybe been okay in Modern or okay in Legacy, if that's the power level of your cube, or even Vintage. If a card has existed, maybe it fell by the wayside, so you're thinking, okay, it's really not that powerful. Yeah, if a card was competitive, at least in the last few years, it's probably a very, very, very powerful card, and not just something to, okay, I'm going to put this in my cube, and if there's a little bit of support for it, maybe it'll get by. Those kind of decisions can be very, very impactful on that 40,000 foot view.
So I think the wrap-up takeaways that I think we can leave you with is that what I would do if I were to start working through a lot of these cuts, because again, trying to work through 250 to 300 some odd cuts would take us all day if we were trying to like sit here and break it down, is prioritize what your packages are actually trying to do. And when you look at something like, say, Academy Manufactor, what is the draft line to get there? Like, what are people drafting in order to feel like they can pick their manufacturer without feeling like you just drafted a 3-mana 1/3,
yes.
Right? And if you can't really justify that amount, or you don't really know how to figure that out, the best thing that you can do is take the card or the kind of set of cards that you're trying to figure out, go into the filter tab, and then you go into advanced. And then you can put in like the Oracle text of like whatever falls into that category, whatever that mana value is, and start working your way down from there. And that is kind of going to be your best avenue for figuring out what actually works within inside your packages. Because a lot of these are just kind of good stuff cards, and then we have the occasional Academy Manufacturer, which feels like a juice worth your squeeze. And this is the thing that he exclusively wanted us to be able to point out, was the things that aren't really worth the squeeze.
Yes.
Right? More trouble than they're worth.
Yeah.
Right? And it's okay. It's definitely okay to be ambitious. And being ambitious when you start is part of the process. And I think that in terms of what you are trying to do with this cube, I think that you have a clear vision. I think that you have a good amount of selection there. Now it's just a matter of taking the marble block of your cube and starting to chisel it down into the sculptor.
Yeah, make David.
Into the sculpture you want.
Yeah, agree 100%. I would say that the filtering that's capable on Cube Cobra really can be your best friend. I will say that I've been using that extensively a lot more recently.
Quick note, before I forget. The land selection. I think that you did a really good job, and this is something that I specifically wanted to praise, but forgot for a moment.
A lot of utility.
Yes, there is a lot of utility, but the land section in particular, I feel like has a very good, diverse section of like options, utility lands, and most importantly, fixing. I see that you threw in like the tri-lands, you threw in 7 or 6 of each of all the dual lands. And that's like a lot of fixing, right? This is a lot of fixing. And this is like really good. And I feel like that actually let you sidestep one of the biggest mistakes I feel like a lot of people make when they're first starting off with their cube.
Yeah.
Is that you don't have to have like the best fixing.
No.
You do not have to have like fetches into untapped duels.
No.
Like that is not the case. Like, you can have tapped duels, you can have tapped lands and be fine. And a lot of these are very fair lands that have a lot of good fixing in here. And you did a really good job having a good ratio of these lands. So if at any point you want to, like, trim out more cards and you're unsure, maybe bringing the duels down, the amount of, like, dual color lands down to 6 each, just so that way it's, like, rounded out. But for the most part, I feel like your ratio is about where you want it in terms of lands. So that way people can draft a lot more of what they're trying to build.
Okay. And I will say the caveat to that is, like I mentioned, that's a little misleading because, so as an example, Dimir shows 7 dual lands, right? But That's not actually the case. When you look at something like Duskmantle, House of Shadow, that is actually only tapped for colorless, but you can get to pay blue-black and then tap to target player puts the top card of his or her library into their graveyard. So, and same with Nephalia Drownyard. So you've actually probably got, and I actually did the numbers on this, 7 is a little misleading. You've actually only got from between 4 to 6 in each of the color pairs when it comes to the actual fixing lands. A lot of those color pair lands that you're looking at there on Cube Cobra are actually utility lands rather than like straight up fixing lands. I would also
maybe
argue,
cutting some of the utility lands but keeping the fixing.
Yeah, and even some of the filter lands as well. I will say I don't typically treat the filter lands as proper mana fixing, because even though you get to sort of filter them, as the name suggests, from one color to the other, I don't know. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. I don't know. But you're still a little bit more limited, right? So, but I do agree. What I do like, and I will say this, I do really, really like the tri-lands. I think any land that, even if it comes in tapped, if it's giving you 3 colors, they're not triomes. They don't have to be. They're a very, very inexpensive option that gives the players incredible fixing options. One thing interesting to note, however, is there is a significant lack, and I've also done the same thing with my Diablo cube when it comes to artifact fixing. So you don't have a ton of signets or talismans or anything in there. So even though when we talked right back at the beginning of the episode, you do have a lot of options, you're not bound by color necessarily when it comes to a lot of the archetype support. There is a lot of cross-pollination, but you are going to be a little restricted when it comes to the fixing. I can imagine that the players are going to take this fairly prioritize. They're going to prioritize it fairly highly. I generally do whatever I draft, but I feel like those are going to be prioritized, and rightly so. But these 5-color, even 4-color soupy decks are going to be very difficult to put together, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, and I think that this environment is at a good speed to support that, and with the kind of packages that you have at the 5-color soupy decks could be sufficiently punished. And that's usually the number one concern when people are starting off with their cubes is, how do I keep people from just drafting 5 colors of the best cards from every pack?
Agreed. That's something that, don't get me wrong, there's a place for that, and sometimes it's an easy and not uninteresting way to draft is to be able to kind of go, I just want to pick the best card. And, that's fine if that's the experience that you want to promote. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. But this does seem to me like the archetypes that are present in here, the curator wants to give this an identity outside of just your typical, hey, there's zombies and werewolves or vampires or whatever. It does look like, I'll say the potential is incredible. I'm excited to see where this goes. Hopefully we can do another review on this at some point down the line. There's a lot of cards to cut. I think the curator's got a heck of a job in front of them, but I'm excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, I'm excited to see the updates, and I'm more than happy to draft this, and I hope that you actually do get a chance to listen to this. And more importantly, thank you for involving me with the process of you going through building a cube. It's not very often that I get to actually work with somebody to build a cube from scratch.
Yes,
right?
Contrary to what you might have heard, May knows what she's talking about. I don't know if anyone knows that, but anyway. All right, I'm going to take us to the socials, as always, to our Patrons, to Patrick, to Jeff Stumpo, to Nick Lapointe, to Chris Fitzgerald, Timber Dragon, Brian Christensen, Keaton Schultz, Lord Justice, Preston, and Sam McKenna. Big thank you to all of you guys for the ongoing support. Again, get in on the conversation at facebook.com/groups/mtgcube, where our resident absent co-host Anthony is an administrator over there, and we all know what that does, but great conversation going on there, well over 1,000 members. If you want to support the show, you can use our inkedgaming.com/ubercube affiliate link to get all kinds of custom playmats, dice bags, mouse pads, custom and large volume products available. If you want to hit us up on the socials, you can find us at Bluesky, ubercubemtgpodcast.bsky.social, or at Twitter at ubercubemtgpod. If you got a longer conversation, question, comment, whatever about the episode that you're listening to right now, maybe even a previous episode, or about the podcast in general, hit us up at ubercubemtgpodcast@gmail.com. As always, you can come hang out with us on the Discord. Tons of cool conversation going on there. And again, a big thanks to all of our patrons at patreon.com/ubercube for helping us keep the lights on. And with that, we're going to say what we always say here at Ubercube, which is Happy Cubing! Spooky.